Well, good evening, church. As I mentioned this morning, we have a lot of people who've been suffering quite a bit. And many people were here this morning that represented a lot of pain and suffering. And so I decided to put this lesson together and give me something to think about when you continue to slave in the trenches and I go on vacation from next Sunday. Thriving through misery. I'm always amazed when I look at the Kalahari and I see how arid it looks and how seldom they get rain. Yet, when rain falls, overnight, everything will become beautiful and lush. And when you go very close to these beautiful flowers, you'll see that their leaves, that their stems, and every part of them is very tough, it's very rugged. Moisture doesn't escape from these flowers. They succulents. They sort of got quite a bit of fat tissue to them. When you feel them like this, you can squish them if you wanted to, and there's a lot of juice in them. And that sort of reminds me of the way we live our lives. We're either in a very arid, dry time where we are just waiting for the next rain to come, or we're in this lush time. And that's through the years I've changed my perspective a little bit. I think that's how we can see it from an earthly perspective. But there's very definitely a heavenly perspective that makes the desert and the wilderness only make sense if you think about God. This world makes no sense. It is a harsh, violent, arid, hostile environment unless you have Christ in you. So the first thing I want us to do is open to Job. And we'll just be looking at Job, chapter 1, and one verse out of chapter 42, when we'll see the conclusion of the whole thing. So look at Job chapter 1 in terms of your own life. The first thing you will see if you look at Job chapter 1 is Job's life is lush, and it's beautiful, and it's relaxed, and everything is perfect. It just can't get any better. And then all of a sudden you see the misery as the tallies come in, and you see just how much he lost. You know, he has 7 sons and he has 3 daughters, and then he has 7,000 of this and 3,000 of this and 500 of this and 500 of that. And just in a very short condensed time, it's all taken away. And he's in wilderness and he's in suffering. But then you see his reaction to that, and his reaction to that shows you the final product that suffering made Job into, how it turned him into something really incredible. So it's a very simple story. It's one that you and I have known for many, many years, but it can bring meaning to your life. It's also one of the earliest stories ever written. Maybe the first book of the Bible to be written. Definitely not first in chronological order, but we track it back to the oldest form of Hebrew that there is. And so it reads like a story. Once upon a time, right? There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now, let me ask the elders, how would you like it if you had a church full of people like that? Just look at that. Isn't that what every one of us as Christians wants to be like? It's beautiful, blameless, upright, fears God, turns away from evil. Just a wonderful guy. There was born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. Now just look at the comparison. How many sons? 7. Okay, how many sheep? 7,000. All right. How many daughters? 3. And how many camels? 3,000. And then the rest is work animals. 500 yoke of oxen and 500 female donkeys. He had the best of the best, and he had the perfect number of everything. 10 in the Bible will always represent perfect completeness. And so you can see it in there if you just look a little bit carefully. And very many servants. so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Blameless, upright, a man who fears God. And he's the greatest man. So you can understand that God has been blessing this man. And he's accumulated all of this because of his way of life. Is that a fair assumption? Okay. So how about us? How have we lived our lives? Have we lived our lives in a good way? Is it a fair statement when something goes horribly wrong in our lives to say, but God, why? I've done everything right. And to make our lives being everything perfect equate to the fact that God's always going to take care of us and He's never going to harm us. Is that an assumption? You see the balance here? Let me tell you how dangerous that is. What happens when suffering comes and you've made that link? You're going to say, why me? God, what did I do? God, why are you doing this to me? I've done everything right. And at that point, what's going to happen to your faith? Or what could happen to your faith? You could lose your faith at that point. If you've made that connection, it could turn out to be a really, really bad thing for you. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day. And they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So they're normal kids, they're having fun. And here is this really nice dad, but his kids are just normal kids. Verse 5, and when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them. And he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did continually. This man didn't just do what was expected of him. He did more than what is expected of him. He went beyond the second mile. Just in case. This wasn't even something that you could visibly see. They might have cursed God in their hearts. And so he does this incredible amount of effort to make sure that his kids are consecrated. Have you ever found a favorite place in nature? Somewhere where you can go that it looks just beautiful. Jeremy, you've been able to go all over America. You've probably found a few places that are beautiful, right? Just beautiful. To me, it would be going out to the Carnes' place and looking out at the grass. There where we go and shoot once a year. And its grass is beautiful, and it's lush, and it's green, and there's some big trees out there in that valley, and there's a couple of cows, and the cows are there, and if you listen, you can hear the birds chirping in those beautiful trees, right? I mean, it's just so peaceful, and there's some naughty little dandelions growing up on the edge, and they have all these beautiful colors, and you say, that is just perfect. That's how I want my life to always be. For me, it was when I was a young kid. I made a bargain with myself. I really did. You'll hear this and you'll say, no, I'm lying. But I really, really did. I said to myself, because I loved sugar. I grew quite a bit just on glucose. I used to pile that sugar in. I had chocolates, and whenever I'd have a cup of coffee, I would take 3 heaped teaspoons of sugar and I would put it in the black coffee, and then I would top it off with some milk. And I did that with tea as well. To this day, my brother still does that. If you want to make him a cup of coffee, put 3 heaped teaspoons of, and I know Cammie, whenever she texts or talks to him, says, Dad, cut out on that sugar. But this is the bargain I made with myself. Enjoy all the sugar you want, because one day you're not going to be able to do that anymore. So I'm in the one-day stage. But I remember a day when I could have a slab of candy bar, and now and again I'll still do that. but very, very, very rarely. Maybe once a year. But that's how we sometimes see our life. It's comfortable and it's nice, and we equate that to a bargain that we made with God, that everything is perfect, and we didn't realize that there's another side to the bargain. There's going to come a day when you're not always going to have all that sugar. Now, if you had to ask Doreen how I drink my coffee for the last, how long? 3-4 years? Black, no sugar, nothing in it, and it tastes terrible. Because it's that instant stuff. It's not even the nice stuff that you get out at the nicer restaurants and things. So sometimes we look at our life and it's just too blessed to complain. Too blessed to complain. By the way, that's a sticker that you can find on some cars at the back. Secondly, life doesn't stay that way. So look at verses 13 to 19 and see the pain that this poor man has to go through. In Job chapter 1, verses 13 through 19. Now there was a day, that's ominous. It's not one day there was this man in the land of Uz. Now it's ominous. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. So what do we know about that day? There's happiness. The kids are enjoying themselves, right? Seems like life is going to continue as always. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the 500 oxen were plowing and the 500 donkeys were feeding besides them. Now, it doesn't say the numbers, but that's what they were. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants. Remember, he had a lot of servants also, with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. In a moment, your life can change. And it's not going to be like you think it's going to be. And you're not going to be prepared for it. The only preparation you have for it is times like this. When you and I sit together in a church building like this, and we listen to sermons like this, and we meditate, and we think about what are we going to do when that day comes? What are you going to do when somebody puts a sword to your neck and says, deny Jesus Christ as the Son of the living God? What will you do? And you know, you'll do it in ways less obvious than that if you don't decide right now what you're going to do. I alone escaped to tell you. Sorry, there it goes, verse 16. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep. Remember the 7,000 sheep and the servants and consumed them. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And there's the camels, I think it's going to happen now. And while he was still speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the 3,000 camels and took them and struck them down and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. And while he was speaking, while he was yet speaking. Now you see, up to now, he could see the enemy, right? It was someone out there. And now it seems like there's an act of God that's going to take out his children. You and I know the real story. We know who the real enemy is behind this. God never explains to Job, but it was not me. You know, he lets Job think this. And there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon them, fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. This is heart-wrenching. This is awful. I can only think what it must be like for those who are first responders that have to break the news to people and to tell them your whole family was wiped out while you were gone. And how do they actually react to that? In Christmas, just before the Christmas of 2003, there was a lady called Lydia. She was at work. She came home, her house was in flames, only to find out that she had lost 10 of their children that night. Everything that they had was wiped out. She alone survived. How do you survive that? How do you get through something like that? We had a funeral this Friday. And we had a couple of members from the church were there, and everything was nice and everything was calm. And then all of a sudden, the Summer Church of Christ was persecuted. Is that accurate? That's accurate, right? And it was so bad, the proceedings had to be called off until the situation disappeared, the source of the problem. And then it continued. But to tell you it was traumatic is definitely not an understatement. It was incredibly traumatic. And those of you who came to church this morning, you would have maybe noticed a police car extra, and you would have noticed some more people than usual, moving around. And obviously nothing is going to happen. Nothing happened, but just being a little bit cautious. But it happens in a moment that you don't expect it. I never in my wildest imaginations thought that I would be at a funeral, officiating at a funeral, and somebody would start cussing God and the church that I love. But it happens. And if you're not aware that it can happen, if you're not prepared for it, you won't know what to do in a situation like that. But it's the reality of the world that we live in. It's a very, very hostile place. And no matter how hard you try, you can never predict everything. And so if you're asking at that point, why me, God? Why did that happen to me? Guess what you won't be able to do? You won't be able to let it go. You won't be able to continue living. You will look for ghosts around every corner instead of doing what you need to really do, which is say, I forgive you. Let it go. Let's get on with our lives. We're the only people in the world that can just wipe out any offense that anybody has against us or we have against anybody else. Just forgive. Don't hold it. Let it go. I've told you more than once that if you get in the way of God, then God can't deal with a situation that He needs to deal with because you're in the way. Just get out of the way and let God take over. And so no matter how bad the news is, you need to move past the why question to where you can let go of the anger and the bitterness or the rage or the confusion or the bargaining with God, which may have been in Job's case. He might have bargained a little bit. Why is this happening? I've lived a good life, and then his friends and all that they're saying. But look at the final product that we have. Let me just go through this quickly. There is no right or wrong way to respond to a situation. You need to avoid obsessively reliving the traumatic event. Take a break if something traumatic has happened to you. Take a break from watching the news because that's going to make you relive stuff. And ignore your feelings will slow the recovery. So you've got to process. You've got to think through things. But please don't do it too long. As soon as you can, move on. Reestablish the routine that you used to have. Recognize when the traumatic stress becomes post-traumatic stress syndrome, when you just can't let it go, when you're stuck. In other words, make stress reduction a priority. Use all your senses, to look at beautiful things around you. Breathe, sleep, and eat healthy. So let me take you back to this beautiful meadow. You're looking at this beautiful meadow out of the Kansas place, right? There's cows, there's grass, and it's to you the most beautiful place in the world. Birds, dandelions over there, and you come the next day, and Dave has taken it one way, and he's ripped it apart. And he's just gone, and after the one way, he took the normal plow, and you come there, and instead of this beautiful lush green grass, it's all turned over, and it's this brown color. And instead of the birds, being all through there, they're not there anymore. There's a couple of hens that are picking at worms. And the birds are quiet. The tree might have even been taken away. It might not even be there. And when you look at that, what do you see? What do you see when you look at a piece of ground like that? Now, Woody, you would see something you can sow some seed on, right? You would look at it with the correct eyes, but the normal person won't see that. They'll say, why did this happen to me? They won't realize what is actually happening. So James chapter 1 verse 2 says, count it all joy, brothers, when you suffer various trials, right? How do you do that? When you see this beautiful meadow all plowed up, well, you've got to see what God's doing. You've got to see that He's preparing soil over here. You might not see it, but that is what is happening. So we look at the final product. Majestically praising is the final product. Job comes through all of this. A man who went beyond the normal, went to the second mile, and he survived it. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground. He was grieving. But what else did he do? You see it? And worshipped. You see, if you've made this bargain with God, I will live this good life if you will bless me. Then when your ground is tilled and it's arid and it looks ugly, you're not going to be able to worship God, because at that point you will lose your faith, or you'll come extremely close to losing your faith. So be very, very careful at that moment. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked shall I return. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. It's amazing how he looks at his life and he sees all that has happened, and he doesn't get angry with God. He doesn't. And so I want you to go back to that meadow. And I want you to look at that meadow. Used to be green, used to be lush. It's now all tilled, and it's brown and it's arid. But I want you to look past your physical eyes. I want you to look with eyes like Woody's eyes, a farmer's eyes. And I want you to see what is actually in that field. Can you see the autumn wind coming in? Can you see the golden heads of corn swaying in the breeze? Can you see that piece of ground that only fed a couple of cows now been able to feed a whole city and have seed left for maybe a whole country? Just because God came in and He had His perfect way with you. Don't see what you see initially. Don't look at yourself like the devil would want you to look. Look at yourself like God would want you to see. And so here are a few things that I put together that can help you. By the way, let's just read this one thing to get the conclusion. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job. Job's friends came, they questioned him. Job wanted to question God, realized this was a pathetic thing for a worm like him to do, repented of that, and this is what happens now as a result. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, when he had forgiven his friends, in other words, when he didn't hold on to that anger that he could have. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. That's why those figures were so incredible. He had the perfect number of everything. Now he had double the perfect number. So, things will never be the same again when the plowman comes in and tills the soil of your heart. Accept that. An empty chair becomes less empty. Believe that. Deep sorrow brings unspeakable joy. Meditate on that. And love never dies. Live that. These are things that you can take. These are lessons that you can get if you will only focus on the peace and move past the pain. But you see, it's the going through the pain that brings you to a much, much richer understanding of what actually is happening. Just today, just about 5 o'clock, just a little bit after 5 o'clock, I got a message. And it was something like this. Something really, really bad has happened to someone. And this person cannot understand it. Cannot understand why God would do this. And you know, here's the problem. When it's happening to you, you can handle it. But what happens when it's happening to one of your children? To an innocent person? How do you handle that? And this is not what happened, but imagine if you have somebody that you love, and it's just a person, 0 to 10 years of age, that gets a cancer diagnosis, and it's a terminal cancer diagnosis. See, God hurt me. God punished me. But don't do that. It doesn't matter what it is, but I will tell you this. It's going to be complex, and it's going to be something you cannot leave alone. And you need to learn to leave it alone. Don't ask why, God. Did Job blame God? Did Job curse God? No. In all of this, he never did. He said, naked I came to the world, naked I will leave. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Gets down in his face and worships God. That's the one thing you can always do as a church. You can always come back. Don't let the devil get your faith. Don't make that bargain. As long as what I do good things, God's going to take care of me. Don't do that. Because the God of this world is who? Who is the one person that can come right now and destroy all these walls and have this building fall on us? The God of this world is Satan. Be very careful about the bargains we make. And then Jesus says, by the way, that wall that fell on those people and killed them? That was just an accident. And you're reading so much into it. Remember that? So be very careful about what the devil says that you must do. I don't know where you find yourself in your life right now with your walk with God, but I know that you can find a path through pain into peace. And I know that if you would look with the right eyes, you will see that your life is going to be so much richer than if you hold on to it. So let it go, move past it. If you need the prayers of the church to do that, please come forward. If you need to be baptized today, please don't hesitate. Come forward right now as together we stand and sing.